You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Welcome to the 42 Cast, your ultimate answer to fandom, geekiness, and everything. As always, I am your host, Nathan, and we have another great episode lined up for you where we're going to talk about monsters. Yes, it's a vague topic, but it's one that I think that we'll have a lot of fun talking about because we're going to look at it from various sides. But before we talk about that, let's meet our cast for this week. So, starting off, he is one of my two friends who's very into Howard the Duck, and that is my friend Steven. How are you doing, Steven?
Doing good. How are you? You did not introduce me with Don Knotts today.
I did not introduce you with Don Knotts. I feel like it's getting a little old.
That's fair. I have friends.
But you
who
can
feel
do
the same way.
You can do this episode as Don Knotts.
Oh,
if
you
you
do the
want
whole thing
to.
as Don. He's kind of a monster. Yeah. Yeah, I could do. Oh yeah, I could do the whole Don Knotts thing if you like.
You know, we could always do the question of if Don Knotts was a monster, what monster?
Which monster would?
Yeah. What monster should Don Knotts have played?
But on a different topic, thank you for having me back.
No, yeah, I always love having you on, Steven. Of course, I saw you like 3 days ago.
In
person. So
it's Chicago.
So it's kind of just repeating our last weekend and all the panels that we did.
Which I am down for because that's it's always anytime I get to spend more time with you, I'm good. It's a good time. So
thank you.
And thank you for having me on a vague topic because I'm a vague person. So that works.
There you go. Yeah. It's the 42 Cast, making connections. All right. Well, it's good to have you back on the show, Steven.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Next up is the man who wants to be known as the person who hated the DCEU, and that is Nate. How are you doing,
Yes.
Nate?
Great.
See, I'm not bringing up D&D anymore.
Yeah, I'm not the D&D orca man. But now I'm going to be the guy who's yet to see a good DCEU movie.
Right. So yeah, what's been going on for you, Nate?
Oh, just trying to learn new math, and I live in the South, so we're gonna get a little bit of snow tomorrow morning. So I had to go and get my all the ingredients for my milk sandwiches, all the bread and milk and butter and cheese. Make sure we can make lots of grilled cheeses sandwiches. So when we're snowed in,
so is it like half an inch is forecasted, and so everything's gonna grind to a halt?
Right now, it's a 1/4 inch of wintry mix.
Man, how will you survive?
I don't know. I don't think we can do it. Just pray for me.
I remember those days. Well, I feel your pain on the new math. I have gone a few rounds with my kids on, with all of that, and they want to do it the way the teacher taught them, but I don't know the way the teacher taught them. I know the way that I learned it, and I feel for you, man. But have you been doing anything fun?
Oh, yeah, I am going back and watching. We just did, just to get people oriented in time, we just did for the For All Mankind episode. And I went back because I didn't have time to watch it with my dad. So now I'm going back and rewatching it with my dad. And he's like, wait a minute, that's not what happened. I'm like, I know that. He's like, I remember that, and that is not what happened.
That's
I was there, and that's not how that happened.
If you were an awful person,
I know.
that's where you could start gaslighting your dad and be like, Dad,
no, I'm pretty sure
don't you remember the news?
Dad. But you remember? He's not quite old enough where I can get away with that.
Oh, okay. That's an awful thing to do, but for some
But he
reason,
really he really likes it because he's like, oh yeah, what would it be like if this
Yeah.
happened instead of that happened? And
No, I was so
Ted,
taken with that show because, like, the
like
whole idea
Ted
of
Kennedy is the president at this point. We're still in the first season, and
Mhm.
Ted Kennedy's president now, and he's like, oh yeah, yeah. If he didn't get caught at the island, killing that girl by running off the bridge, then he could have been president. Everyone said he was going to be president. It was very cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's yeah. What you do with your dad is like what I do with my mom whenever she visits. Is we go through something. So like right now we're in the middle of Orphan Black. So next time she finishes, I'll show her the rest of that show. So yeah, but I've already done like The Expanse and some other shows with her. So yeah. But yeah, it's good to have you back on the show, Nate.
It's great to be here.
All right. Next up, he is the man that hates everything, and that is Daviar. How are you doing, Daviar?
Thank you for that, Nate. But you know what I really, really hate is that just in time for the holiday season, we get our third Avatar movie, everyone. Yay. I can't wait.
That is something that I will not do an episode on because I hate it so much that I just don't want to just unleash vitriol and nothing but vitriol on the internet.
You know what? I am so torn because I really want us to do an Avatar retrospective whenever they get to part 7, 8, 9, or 10, whichever one. But the problem with that is I would have to watch them all. And I don't think the joy I would have in hating on all of the movies would surpass my dread in having to watch them all.
Yeah, funny enough, James Cameron started to finally walk back because, before it was like 5 movies locked in, and he started saying, well, if the third one's not successful, maybe 4 and 5, even though they've already shot things for 4 and 5, but whatever. I guess they'll just go in a can somewhere. But like, I'm like, oh, please, people. But see, I thought 2 was going to bomb. I was like, surely. In the years that have passed since the first one, when the effects are no longer like so legendary or whatever, like surely people will realize, actually, that was a really empty movie that was really stupid and it was just basically Fern Gully in space. Like we don't need this. But then the second movie came out and also made like $1 billion, and I was like, what is the matter with humanity? Like,
bro, Fast X is still making money, so
I prefer
Avatar
that
films.
to Avatar.
You know what? I do too. But let's just put these things in a box and just say because one exists, the other one is destined to make money. Like this money will make $1.5 billion just in its sleep. So the unfortunate thing is, this great director who I've watched for my entire life, he will end his career on these films, and that's a sad thing. Look, shout out to the Avatar fans.
He's still putting out there, and I realize he doesn't direct it, but he does produce it, so I guess it really doesn't count. But he is still saying there's going to be a second Alita movie, so I'm still hoping for that to come out.
I wish.
Yeah. Look, shout out to the Avatar fans. I love you. I'm glad that whoever you are, because I still have yet to find one. Yet these movies make.
Oh no! When the last one came out, and I was all like, "Who asked for this? Nobody wants this." There were like a dozen people on my Facebook that were like, "Oh, I can't wait to. I'm gonna see it. I love it. All that kind of stuff." So no, I mean they're there. I mean, my opinion of those people like went down, but like.
There's always the promise though that if they make enough of them, one of them will have a different plot.
Yeah.
Oh no, that won't happen.
So Daviar, is there anything good in your life? Anything you want to talk up? Like anything happy? Like,
hey man, wow.
You're bringing me down, man.
Audience, he's not leaning you to one particular way. Just so you know, no. It's the holiday season, man. Hey, Stranger Things is back for the final, we think, season. And hey, I had fun with the first 4 episodes. So yeah, Christmas Day. And hey,
they've already announced that animated spinoff. So
oh yes.
Franchise opportunities.
Yeah, I'm having fun with that. Hey, and also too, I know this is a nerd cast, but hey, shout out to football season. Here we go.
All right. Well, yeah. There you go. You're perhaps the only person who's been on this show that has ever given a shout out to football.
I like being a well-rounded geek. It's all right.
There you go. Yeah. It's good to have you on the show, Debbie.
Thanks, my friend.
All right. And finally, you've already heard her. She's our resident cryptid, and that is Corey. How are you doing, Corey?
I'm doing great. And as always, happy to be back on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So
Yeah, when you said that you wanted to be on this one, I was like, I have to do whatever to make it work for Corey's schedule because yeah, this is yours.
This we all know what I'm about here on the 42 cast, and it's monsters mostly. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, anything new and exciting going on for you?
No, just getting a little bit of prep for costuming for the end of the year, trying to wind things down. So it's kind of like the getting into that dead area for me where I get to actually do other life things that don't involve making costumes or wearing costumes or, other sorts of ridiculousness.
You probably don't track this, but how many costumes do you do a year?
It depends on the year. Last year, so 2025 was not super new costume heavy, but 2024 really was. Usually I do between like 8 and 10 new ones a year, which is honestly but I am a person that rewears my costumes multiple times. So I swap things out from older years and we'll do upgrades on things continuously and do stuff. This year I did just slightly fewer just because with Joann's closing, everything's more expensive and harder to find materials and little bits and baubles that you need. So I've done a lot of repairing old stuff and bringing it back out. But yeah, a lot, it depends on the year, honestly. Like there's been years where I've done I made 2 new things and it was exciting. And then there's years where I'm like, I did 12 things and why have I done this to myself? Because my sewing room is still a mess from the last couple of projects I did. And then I get roped into small little projects and I'm like, oh, this will be fun. And I'm like, why did I decide to make 3 Robin Hood tunics in a weekend? That's fine. We're not going to talk about that. It's fine.
Hey, Corey, what one is, oh, God, this one. Can you see it?
Yeah, that's Ellen Ripley, Lieutenant Ellen Ripley.
That's what I thought. I was
from
like,
the first
is that
Alien
Ripley?
film. Yeah,
Okay.
it
really
is
good.
Ripley. I have a plush kitty that I usually carry around. That's my Jonesy. So people clock the kitty first, and then they're like, "Oh, you're Ripley. That's not your real hair." And I'm like, "No, I don't have 80s curls, but I would like to. I just don't have her hair texture." Yeah, that's my.
Your Carlac is great. I love your
Oh,
Carlac.
thank you so much. The voice actress of Carla commented on it, and it made my entire life. I'm just gonna let you know. I love
Live
that
on
one.
that for a decade.
Forever and ever. I really just was like, wait, is this in a fake account, right? This is actually her. That oh my god, I'm dying. Really just made my whole year for that. I love Carlock a lot. Speaking of monsters, I love tieflings a lot. I love D&D tieflings, and Carlock was just one of those. Oh no. She's my best girl, himbo, and I love her, and she's my wife. So I guess I have to be her now. Thank you.
Yeah, I always see all these different costumes from you, and I know you rewear some, but
I do, yeah.
but I was curious, so 8 to 10, that's fine. That's the kind of the ballpark. I just wanted to
yeah. I mean,
know
some
what
of
your
them are
ballpark
also
is.
Closet costumes. My Halloween costume this year was Alien Earth. So it was literally it involved an eyeball and a sheep onesie. So just to put that out there if you've watched the show.
That's rock.
Yeah, I don't always make super elaborate things. Sometimes I do smaller builds.
That's awesome. Shout out to that.
It is great to have you back on the show, Corey.
I'm always happy to be here.
All right. Well, I'm going to break my own rule. And so next up, you know what time it is? It's time for our 5-minute controversy. So normally I don't do this when we have 4 guests, but because of timing and scheduling and stuff, I thought I might have 3 guests for this part. And so I came up with one. So I'm just going to go with it. But the 5-minute controversy, for those of you joining for the first time, is just a way for us to loosen up before we talk about our topic and for you to get some insight into how we feel about something going on in the geekosphere. So the thing that I want to talk about is the news that broke probably about last month at time of recording that although it had been in the ether for almost a decade that there would be another Star Trek movie with Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto and all, and that cast, that officially Paramount has said, no, we are just closing the door on that. We're going to move on Star Trek. So interestingly, I have heard some comments from people live that have literally said it is a demonstration of how Skydance doesn't know what they're doing and because they have done this. And I was like, that's an interesting take, because I don't think that that it's directly bearing on Skydance at all. But I am curious how you guys feel about whether or not this was a good decision to make. So that's what I really want to focus on. Do you think that they should have really put forward more effort into getting this done, or do you think it's good that they're moving on from those movies? So Dathia, I don't know. You're the one person on this cast that I don't think I've ever even talked about Star Trek before with, so I don't even know if you have any care about this. But what is your take on this?
Yeah, I actually do have care about this. So I'm twofold. One, I really did enjoy this trilogy. I am big fans of most of the actors in this series. I'm a huge fan of Chris Pine. I think that dude is a very underrated actor, and I thought he was a fantastic Captain Kirk. Zachary Quinto as Spock, Zoe Saldana as Uhura. I really liked the cast of this movie, and I think the first film is the best one. But the last film was, 9 years ago now? Star Trek Beyond. Yeah, and I think that because it's been such an inconsistent series, and with the gap in time since the last film, I'm okay with them moving on and finding a different direction, because I do think the audience has kind of passed this group by, and I don't think there was ever like a huge buy-in to this trilogy initially anyway. But yeah, so I kind of hate that it is gone, but I totally understand and support that. For me, it's a lot of missed potential there.
Okay. Corey?
So as someone who just watched Star Trek 6, that's Undiscovered Country, right? So this tells you where I am in the grand scheme of Star Trek lore. I actually really enjoyed the trilogy, except for wasn't really into the second one, but that's a whole other thing. I loved this cast as well. I thought it was great. But I think at this point, it's been so many years since they made a last movie. I thought they'd already officially made the decision not to move forward with them. So reading kind of stuff on it, I was like, oh, did they just officially decide now not to? I wish if they had made a movie 5 years ago, I think it would have been great. I would have loved to have seen it. I think now I understand why they're making the decision. I do think there was some missed opportunities to do stuff with this story. Especially now that I have seen the other movies and am relatively caught up, I think. Not really, just kidding. I am not a Star Trek person. Don't take my views as anything other than opinion. But I did really like them. I did really enjoy the cast. I do think that since the since we lost Anton Yelchin, and that really was probably that final blow that kind of took the series off, unfortunately. But because he was a phenomenal actor, everyone in it was great. I'm sad we're not going to get more, but I do understand their decision.
Yeah, it's just so just to update you, Corey. About 2 years ago, they were like, "Oh yeah, we're all in. We're making a Star Trek film. We're going to get back Zachary Quinto and Chris Pine. We're going to do this." And then so that's why there was some oomph around it. But then now they're deciding, and I don't know what problems they were having getting that done, but there was at least a push at one point relatively recently to try again with that.
I'm not surprised that this is the decision that they came to. They don't always know what to do with the Star Trek films, in my very uneducated opinion as someone outside of the fandom. Yeah, they don't seem to know what to do with them.
Nate?
Yeah, I enjoyed the Abrams. Actually just rewatched the first one with my kids, and you know what, that the main criticism that I didn't see it at the time, but I saw it this time for some reason, the lens flares. I don't know what it was at the time. People were complaining about the lens flares. I'm like, it's not that bad. But then I'm watching the movie and I'm just getting blinded every 2 seconds. I'm like, what is going on? Oh, lens flares. There's all these lens flares. Where are these lens flares coming from? There's lens flares in space, and you can't have lens flares in space. But I liked them. I liked all three movies, and I was like Corey. I did not hear that 2 years ago. They were like, "Oh yeah, we're getting the gang back together," and I can understand why.
It's kind of been off and on since
they're
the third
huge
one.
stars.
Yeah.
I mean, Zoe. There's no way they can get Zoe's Saldana back. I mean, she's booked for the next 15 years. They can't afford her.
As she should be. I love her.
As she should be, yeah. But yeah, there's just no way you can get her. And everybody else has moved on. I don't know. I'm okay with it. It's fine.
Okay.
Not much of a controversy for me.
Steven?
Yeah. However, would you sway? How would you get Zoe Saldana away from those sweet T-Mobile ads?
With fellow Oscar winner Jeff Bridges.
Right?
Yes.
So yeah, my feelings on this, my feelings on the Kelvin is now if I had not heard that Skydance was going to buy Paramount just to target the Kelvin Star Trek films, but if they did, that's probably the first thing that Skydance would have done that I support.
Well, so the context around this was somebody told me it would be a disaster for Paramount to buy Warner because they'll do to Warner what they just did to Star Trek. And I was like, I'm not sure you can have an opinion that you don't want Paramount to buy Warner, but I don't think that Star Trek is the example because I'm pretty sure this would have happened anyway, but that's a...
Yeah, you know.
It's just kind of
by that you
weird
mean
flex.
Yeah.
If by that you mean kind of take out the garbage, maybe that's okay. Yeah, my feelings on the and God bless anyone who loves these films, but yeah, my feelings range from just open indifference to outright hate, almost provoking violence.
Oh wow, okay.
And
okay.
I love the cast. I mean, the cast is great.
Yeah.
I mostly nonplussed. There's that one film in the middle that I just really leaves a horrible taste in my mouth. I still.
They cured death, and then they had to ignore that in the next movie, where it's like you should be milking con blood like all the time, and then just inject any dead person with it, and then it magically like brings them back to life. But
don't even remind me of plot points in that film that it had any. Seriously, I almost get a physical revulsion. It's the most, that film is I hold that up as the most cynical piece of filmmaking ever, and my problem with the Kelvin timeline really is that most of the Star Trek films, the films in and of themselves, did something to try to move the franchise along somehow. They broadened the scope. They highlighted characters that we hadn't seen highlighted before. They gave depth to some of the characters that we hadn't seen before. They made Khan into a primary villain when he was like an obscure, third, C/D level character in the series. He's in one episode. They made him into a top tier villain. That's great filmmaking. They cemented a lot into the psyche of film goers, and then you've got the Kelvin trilogy, which is largely just fan service, and it doesn't move the franchise anywhere.
I'm going to guess that you didn't watch the third one because you hated the first two so much.
I did watch the third one. It's one that I'm kind of largely indifferent to, and it's probably the one I like the best, which is not saying a whole lot. It's okay. I would if I were going to watch one, that's the one I would watch. But I will admit I watched it once.
Okay.
Whereas many of the Star Trek films I've seen many times. Each one of these Kelvin ones, I think I have watched once. They didn't wow me. The Trek and the Furious, the third one, was, yeah, but
All right.
it's okay.
A lot to unpack.
It's okay.
We're not going to focus on this.
It's okay, but it's largely fan service. It's a lot of my problem with, and I love Strange New Worlds, which is television doesn't have to move the paradigm quite as much. But Strange New Worlds, I love Strange New Worlds, except where they delve into fan service. They bring up characters that we've kind of seen just to touch. I don't think you need to do that. I want to see them move something forward. I want to see a new ship. I want to see new characters. I want to see go someplace where man has not gone before. That's the whole thing with Star Trek. And the Kelvin stuff was just a retread, and it didn't say anything new. It didn't give us any new insights to these characters. And it just was flat for me. So if you're going to move past this, I'm like, great, let's do that.
Okay. I feel like we're coming to a catharsis here. Even if you,
counseling may be available
your negative emotions. So funny enough, I thought I was going to be the Debbie Downer because I was going to say I only enjoyed the third one of the Kelvin movies. I felt like that was real Star Trek, and I felt like it was different. Like it wasn't a storyline or characters or anything that we've sort of seen before. The first one I was kind of largely indifferent to because while there were things that I liked, there were things that were so ridiculously over comedic that it left a really bad taste in my mouth, and I felt like it was sort of that two-tier thing of like, oh, let's do Kirk's got a tongue that's hanging out of his mouth and he can't talk and, you know, running around the ship, and I was just like, that's the kind of stuff that I was just like, okay, I mean, that I think you're trying to make it like for kids now, but then parts of it weren't, and it was just kind of this weird, uneven thing. Second one was just awful. I mean, but the third one I felt like was real Star Trek, and so I was willing to give a fourth one a chance all the times that they were saying. So I was like, yeah, once you get J.J. Abrams out, who, you know, directly said, I don't like Star Trek, so it was like you gave him the director's chair. You know, if you have somebody who actually likes Star Trek directing, you can do a good movie with this cast, and I really appreciated it. But, you know, I echo the statements from the other people, though. I think now too much time has passed. So if you had come out with this just before COVID, I think that would have been great, you know, like that would have been, you know, 3-4 years, and they could have done something with it. But all these rumors, and there were rumors at one point Quentin Tarantino was going to do a movie with this cast, and there was all this, and apparently he did turn in a script. I don't think anyone seriously ever considered doing Tarantino's Star Trek, but apparently he did turn in a script.
Watch the hell out of that, though.
Every one of us would. Every one of us would.
But and then I don't think that this is a reflection on Skydance, because I'm pretty sure this is going to happen anyway. So I just, like I say, it was this weird comment where two different people were both like, like Paramount's mishandling Star Trek. Like, they haven't had time to say what their vision for Star Trek is yet. Like, give them a chance to like actually do. The fact that they canceled this movie, which was in limbo for 9 years, does not mean that, they're mishandling Star Trek. But anyway, all right. So we're kind of all in agreement that the whole, like, Skydance doesn't know what it's doing thing is bunk. But I think we're also all in agreement that this was a good decision, even though we all came to it for different reasons. All right. But yeah, now we're gonna move on. Although I guess talking about, CEOs and big corporations might be somewhat topical, but we're going to move on to talk about monsters. But first, we're going to pause for a promo from another fine podcast.
Everyone these days could use a little support, and your friends at the ESO Network are no different. With the ESO Network Patreon, the cool thing is when you help support us, it's you who will benefit. With 4 tiers starting for as little as 25 cents a week, you can listen to some of your favorite network podcasts early, hear exclusive content, maybe get some ESO swag, or even possibly take a shot at the geek seat. All you need to do is sign up at patreon.com/ESO Network.
Does that appear the mark of a human being or a demon's? Are these human vampires or bats?
And we're back. And like we mentioned at the top of the show, we are talking about monsters this time. Now, this was a topic that was suggested to me when I was asking directly for just ideas for topics. And one of the reasons why I kind of, glommed onto this one is that it sort of started something in the back of my head. And one of the things that, as someone who has been in the Doctor Who fandom since I was very young, once I started listening to British fans, there's this sort of thing where they refer to aliens in Doctor Who as monsters, regardless of how those aliens are expressed. So it's like, if you're familiar at all with, classic Doctor Who, there's the Ice Warriors. the monsters in this episode were the ice warriors, and I'm like, well, I mean, they're an alien civilization with like their own like culture and everything. So like, but you know, in England, you know, Doctor Who fandom of course goes back a lot farther. A lot of people grew up in that fandom with other children that grew up, and I feel like it's almost like a sort of childlike way of looking at it. Like every episode has to have a monster, quote unquote, and you know, whether or not like how that creature expresses itself and whatnot. And so to me, I was like, you know, and that is a disconnect going back where, you know, I've always sort of thought about that. If it's like, you know, to me, I wouldn't call that a monster if it is not like, you know, if it's like just an alien culture, they look different from us, but they don't, you know, that's not a monster to me necessarily. So I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how would you define a monster? Stephen, what is how would you define a monster?
Boy, I was thinking about this, and I think I come to two possibilities, two things that could be a monster. One is the sort of the visual monster, which is, you know, sort of something that looks vaguely something that we would recognize, but has been corrupted somehow. So, you know, you think of like the classic Universal monsters or whatever. They look vaguely humanoid, but something is off. Or humanoid, but then they, you know, yeah, just or like a werewolf, which is a combination of things. So something that we looks like something that we recognize, but it's off a little bit, and that offness is triggers a response in us. So there's a sort of a visual monster, and then there's the monster by deeds. You know, you think of like serial killers and things. These are often described as monsters because they look perfectly normal, and yet the things they do are so horrendous that they become monsters too. And so, and it's not like an either or. You could be both, but those are the definitions that I kind of hung on.
Yeah, I kind of think of the second one as more like a metaphorical monster, like they're sort of like the literal monster, and they're sort of the
yeah.
But Nate, what about you?
I was thinking about this too, and I kind of landed similar to Stephen, where, you know, but I think what it is it's just to put a finer point, is the offness is the it's almost human but not quite. So there we have to connect to it somehow. Otherwise, I think you're treading into Alien, where it's not human at all. It is otherly. But also, I think with the physical monster, it needs to be almost singular or unique, and not have a civilization. So a minotaur in a maze is a monster, but a minotaur village is another civilization. And so they're not necessarily going back to your ice monster story with the Doctor Who's. Like, they have a planet and a civilization and culture and art. Like, are they just look like minotaurs? But if it's a minotaur in a maze, then that's the monster of the maze. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think we need to have some sort of uniqueness. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to challenge you on this. Can it not be a pack of because I get the difference between a civilization of quote unquote, you know, something that, you know, that's not a monster. But if it's like, can there not be a pack of monsters?
Oh yeah, like a pack of werewolves. That's still a monster. You know, a hive of vampires. Still a monster, but it's still sort of unique. It's a larger threat. But if it's not like a village or a town or a civilization that we would recognize as a human civilization. But it's interesting because we're putting our own definitions of what civilization is onto this thing, and but then again, well, maybe it's a civilization we don't recognize. And now is that an alien civilization? So I think the clear line, there's a clear line between not monster and monster, or human and monster, but the line between monster and alien, I think, is a little bit finer.
I mean, there might be a Venn diagram here that
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure it's an either or also with monster and alien, that there might
Yeah.
be intersection. So
Yeah.
Daviar?
Yeah. So, see, this is going to be interesting for me because, and it's why I wanted to be on this particular cast because I think that this subject is huge for me. And it's funny because when we were talking a little bit offline, you mentioned that, oh, this could be a nice little frivolous topic. And I instantly kind of paused because for me, I think I think monster is a very loaded concept. And I think that's
Mhm.
why it's such an expansive context in fiction, because I think there it is. I don't know if there's a set definition because it varies so much based on the individual who's prescribing the definition to something.
Oh, there was a
And
reason why I wanted to ask each of you.
yeah,
I agree
yeah.
with you.
Because I think so much of who you are individually, what your experiences are, what your background is, influences what your perspective of a monster is.
Mhm.
And for
Mhm.
me, it is, I don't think I rarely look at an alien or a creature as a monster. My first definition of a monster is always going to be a human. Because for me, my definition of a monster is remorseless, intentional
Mhm.
harm as a base definition. But again, I think there's a lot you can build on from there. But if I have to give a set definition of what defines a monster in my head, it is, again, intention to do harm without remorse. And so yeah, but I'm interested in like where we can go and how we continue to talk about this. But I'll just start there because there's a lot of places I can go without
Sure, yeah,
rambling.
yeah, yeah. No, that's fair. So from that point of view, Godzilla is the king of the monsters, not because it is a giant dinosaur-like thing that has fire breath. It's that it does harm without any remorse.
Well, if we want to use that example, I think the whole example of the king of the monsters is just the human perspective of what Godzilla is, which is a creature that is unlike us, which is unlike anything we know. And by that definition, it's a monster because it's doing harm, but it's doing harm that is often provoked. And from Godzilla's perspective, is it protecting itself? Is it looking at us as the monsters? We're the ones that are harming its environment. So it is actually just kind of protecting or defending itself from us, who it's perceived monsters. So again, your perception of what a monster is really kind of in the eye of the beholder. So I think that's a very interesting question because yes, the humans will always refer to Godzilla as a monster, but is that the definitive definition of what Godzilla is?
So Corey, I wanted to save you for last because I know that you've done a lot of thinking about monsters and you're kind of steeped in monster lore of various kinds and whatnot. So do you have a definition? How would you define?
So I think a lot of my definition can kind of build from some of the stuff that Davior was saying earlier, and also come from my own perspective, kind of from like an anthropological background, and that the majority of stuff is that a monster is the other. And I think in across all cultures and across like everything that we talk about, whether it's like from a horror perspective, from a media perspective, they are in some way the other. Now, what the other means depends on the context. It depends on what we're talking about, and it depends on uh what is going on. Because there's a lot of things that, as you know, in our society that are deemed monstrous that are also not necessarily, if we want to pull this into a real world perspective, that the monster is the other. And the second component of that is that it's something that a certain culture or a group is afraid of. Whether or not that fear has a legitimate basis or is a kind of cultural fear that they have built up in their own minds to not be true or not. That is, again, really, really complicated. There's a lot of things to unpack when we talk about the term monster, especially both historically and in media. But for me, I think the best definition I can say is that something that a one group considers the other. In some way, it is not like us, so that we are afraid of it. And I think that that fear is a very important component to a definition of what makes something a monster or what makes something monstrous for me.
Yeah, see, it's really interesting because, like, to me, in the way that I come at this is almost like 180 degree from where Daviar comes to it. Because to me, if you asked me, like, just point blank without thinking, how would you define a monster? I would basically say there has to be some level of, how do I put it? It's like it's a non-sentient creature, right? Like it's not one that
Mm-hmm.
reasons or thinks more, but also is other. So not like an animal, like something that we would expect, but so things that I think of as monstrous are usually things that have what we would call like an animal level of intelligence, but are also like alien in some way. So like Nate drew a distinction between alien and
Mm-hmm.
monster. I'm not sure I would do that because to me, alien just means non-terrestrial, but something can be terrestrial in a monster and something can be extraterrestrial in a monster, and I would not draw that distinction, because to me, it's the fact that it's just not something that's expected, like in some way distorted or different from like something we would encounter every day, or could encounter on Earth in normal Earth terms. But I always think of a monster as almost like an unreasoning, thing that comes at you, like and is almost like animal like and it's trying to like eat you or just rip you open or something like that. To me, that's like the fear of a monster. And well, I get Steven's point of we also metaphorize that to people. Like I always saw that as like that's not the core definition of a person who is a monster. It's just like we're comparing them to a monster, but they are not. They do have the capability of reasoning. They do have the capability of a conscience. They've suppressed it. They've done whatever, but and they can do monstrous things. But like to me, a person is never an actual monster. It is just a metaphor to like sort of compare them that way.
And Nathan, to that point, excuse me for jumping in here.
Sure.
I think that is why I naturally go to a human being a monster because of the sense of reasoning. When
Mm,
for me, when you have the ability to reason and you have innate senses of empathy and sympathy and what those things are, when you go against those things that are in your upbringing, that are in your, and yes, we can say that, well, this person is doesn't have this or doesn't have that, but I think
right.
those are very unique circumstances. To me, when a person who has reason, who has logic, who has a thinking brain still does remorseless actions of harm, that is what clearly defines them more as a monster than like something outside of that, than like an alien creature that where we don't really know what their perspective is of us, or a kind of entity that's trying to harm us, because again, we don't know what their perspective is of us. So that's why I kind of lean to where I do in regards to that reasoning specifically.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Deviar, if I could, I wanted to because I think that's I think part of the one element of monstrousness or monstrosity. What's a good way to put that? One element of that is the perception from the point of view of the victim, the perception of a randomness of a threat. So there has to be a perceived threat from the monster, but it can't be because like some crimes happen, as we get to the person point, like some people commit crimes at somebody that they know, and and you can see that relationship. But like somebody like a serial killer is considered monstrous because to the victim, anybody could be a victim because there's a certain randomness. There's not a sense, a logic sense. There's not like a relationship that as a public we can see, and so we perceive that kind of crime, or those kinds of criminals, those kinds of people as more monsters versus somebody who just commits a crime against a relative or a spouse or somebody like that. We don't typically define that as monstrous. And I was thinking of things like, and it's the perception of threat. I was thinking of Frankenstein's monster, which is classically thought of as a monster, but actually doesn't mean any harm to anyone until he is perceived as a threat.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's that perception of a threat that sort of distinguishes the monstrous and the randomness of the threat. Like I could be a victim without knowing being involved at all. I could be a victim. That's kind of what makes it a monster to me.
Um, I'd like to pick up on some of the things like that you guys were talking about in terms of the monster as a human. And that's something that like personally I kind of struggle with to define a human as, I guess whether or not you think humans can be monsters or do monstrous acts, I think often comes down to your view of humanity in a weird way. Because what do you think that, like, and this is just not like out there, what do you think humanity is capable of? Like, what is a person capable of on a like any level? Whether or not you view that as being like capable of being a monster, or if that is just a facet of humanity, that humanity can be monstrous in itself. And that's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about just in general. Because I have a little bit of a background in like criminal justice, as so it's one of those things where like people commit horrible, terrible things against each other, which is, something that both like Stephen and Debbie, or you both like touched on a lot. But I think labeling someone a monster can strip someone of their humanity. And thus, by othering them in a certain way, you are putting them on a different, like, I don't know, in a different box than you in a way. But if they're humans committing these acts, what does that say about us as a species? And that is something that like is very complicated. And I understand that I'm opening this weird box of like, what is humanity and what does that mean for us? But it's something that I do think about a lot when it comes down to a lot of things and the horrible things that humans can do, as we've kind of opened this box to talk about these like non-human, versus our non-human creature aspects to, can a human be a monster, or is it just a human doing monstrous things? And for me, that is like a very different, like, those two things are very different in my head, whether or not it is something, but it does mean in both cases, I think it falls under my definition of like, it is someone that is like, or something that is other, you feel is very other than you. It is very strange and different, and you're afraid of it. But like, is it a monster? Is a person a monster? Or do they just do horrible things?
Yeah, I liked your definition, Corey, because of the fact that it allows the room for that also, because I think that I'm kind of like you, that I like things to be, a little more neatly classified than, so like,
that shocks me, Nathan, that you would like your
What, you want to put things in
classification.
little boxes?
You like your boxes? Your tiny
You like
little
boxes?
ones?
Yeah, so yeah, I've always sort of like blanched at the idea of like a person, or like even a sentient, because like in shows where it turns out that something that people thought was a monster turns out to be like a reasoning creature and was like tortured or something, and that's why it's like attacking people or whatever.
Mhm.
I always say, it's not a monster, it's a character. Like to me, that's the point when you make that discovery that it's no longer a monster, it's become a character now.
But
And
most
so like,
monsters, the best monsters are character. By your definition, I'm using your definition here. The best monsters, especially in media, not in real life. We're not talking about, like, I feel like it's very important to
Yeah.
separate these two things. Is like, are we talking about real life people who do terrible things, or are we talking about fictional things that also do terrible things?
Well,
Because
yeah.
there's a big difference between the two. But I also feel like some of the best, even like even characters who do terrible things, like, does that make them not a monster because they've done something terrible? I don't know. This is what I'm exploring in this
Right. Well, yeah, to
podcast.
me, like, there's a level of like, so like if something is like a sentient being, it's no longer a monster. It falls under a completely different like sort of thing, where like it's like this is a reasoning thing that can do, an act. And I get what you're saying about character, because character is also kind of some people would argue that like rooms and settings can be characters within a story. So, when I'm I guess the terminology isn't really great, but to me, it's like once something is proven to be like a thinking, rational being, it kind of falls into a different category at that point, because it is no longer like an unknowable like thing
So
that like that doesn't reason or think the same way we do,
so for you, let's say like a vampire, like just
Yeah.
to throw something out there, you don't view that as a monster.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
know that, I mean, by your
Yeah.
definition, I'm just kind of
yeah, I
exploring
mean,
this idea.
yeah, that vampires are also like characterized very differently depending on the media. But yeah, in most
But
cases, yeah, I would say that, because we tend to make them more reasoning than, yeah,
mhm.
yeah.
And I
less
don't
of
know,
the
would everyone else
animalistic.
agree? Like, how would you classify
No, that's what
a
I was like.
vampire?
That's exactly. I was trying to think of how do you differentiate a vampire character from Hannibal Lecter?
Well,
Yeah.
I think my answer to that would be I think the defining trait of, coming from one of the great TV shows of all time, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, of what the defining trait of a vampire that makes it a monster is soulless. And so I think that maybe that is something that distinguishes it from another creature, is that the vampire does something without soul, without remorse, without feeling. It kills for to live, and it kills sometimes for joy, because again, when there is no soul there, you can do those things. And I think that can be like a differentiation that is meaningful when we're talking about what defines a monster.
So with that, can a human be a monster then? If a human, by your definition, like
Yeah.
soullessly. So do you think a human can be a monster then?
Nate, you have something?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, they
No.
are. I think there's one other thing I want to get circle back to, but yeah, humans can be remorseless. They can be
Mhm.
sociopathic, and they do not operate with the same moral structure that we naturally do as humans. Not just the learned moral structure that we learn through our culture, through our nurturing, growing up in a society. But there's innate things that psychologists have found that is like, even just like in just as an example, innate fairness. They've done experiments with monkeys where they perform tasks and they get a grape if they perform the task, and then they give another monkey for doing the same task a watermelon or something they want more. And the other monkey will stop doing the work because they're not getting a watermelon, and they're not going to do it until they get their watermelon. They're not going to work for a grape. They're going to work for a watermelon. So it is innate going like, no, we're the same. We get fair treatment. We get treated the same for the same job. And there are things that are innate into us of not harming people and without good reason, or what we perceive to be good reason.
Yeah, I think what Daviar made the distinction though between like people who actually have like brain chemical imbalances and those who don't and who still choose to do bad. Not everyone who does like horrible things has a brain imbalance, like so there is kind of a difference with like, people who have an actual mental like a thing where it's like an imbalance or a damage to like corners of their brain that like remove certain like aspects, and ways of thinking.
I think it's culturally dependent, and it's something we can actually observe in our recent time. If we just look at Dungeons and Dragons, the orc in Dungeons and Dragons in the first.
It took an hour to get to D&D.
I've been waiting my turn.
Everybody check your cards. Okay,
we talked about Godzilla.
One.
we talked about serial killers, but yeah, the orc, was just a humanoid that was evil, and you killed and slaughtered them remorselessly, and if you found a clutch of baby orcs, you killed them. And that's how I played D&D way up until like probably the 2000s, until about
I'm
25
really
years.
Was it like
get into
fourth
D&D
edition or
early
fifth
days.
edition that really like? Because I mean, no, seriously,
Second edition.
Okay.
Second edition introduced the half. I'm going to say, I apologize, is the word they used. Okay, I grew up in.
We're using game
half-breeds.
terminology. Yes.
Half-breeds.
Yeah.
So half orc and half orc strictly in the character description were a product of forced copulation between a human woman and a male orc. And you would grow up and you would be a pariah. You weren't accepted in orc society. You weren't accepted in human society. Now in 5th edition, 5.5, the most recent edition, it is now just orc. Half orcs are gone. You're just an orc, and orcs can be bards, and they can have art and music, and they're just strong guys with tusks. And sometimes they have green or purple or blue skin. And they're just another type of heritage you can have. They're not even called races anymore. They're called heritages. And so this is showing the cultural shift of what a monster is.
Yeah, I find it odd that people ever played that way, because that was one of the things, like when they started doing that with fifth edition and whatnot, they were saying like, well, people do this in a horribly racist manner where like certain
Mhm.
races are evil, and I'm like,
Oh yeah.
oh, like I never even conceived of running them like that way, because to me it's just like
I always
there's
just
different
played
cultures
orcs
and there's different things that
as
those cultures
yeah,
prize, but that doesn't make any
yeah.
of them like evil
I
or
just
good or
made them
whatever.
the barbarian horde,
Well, yeah, because I always like
and
imagined orcs being
they
somewhat
just
like
like
Klingons in Star
fighting,
Trek.
you know.
They're fairly
Yeah.
aggressive, but they're not like bad, like in that, in the way where it's like defined evil. There can be good ones too,
I
It's
mean,
just like,
Mhm.
as someone who just watched Star Trek 6, which, as this panel knows, is
right.
all
Yeah.
about race relations with the Klingons,
hmm
Yeah. Yeah.
listening to like Kirk's horrible monologue where I was just like,
Yeah.
Kirk, that's real racist what you're saying right now. That's real
It
bad,
wasn't back
bro.
Right.
then.
But that was the
That
But it, I
point.
wasn't
mean,
back then.
but again, from
Yeah.
like watching it in 2025 for the first time, I
Mhm.
was like, bro, no, what are you
But that was the
saying
point.
this?
The movie
You,
made
yeah.
that the point,
Oh
was that he
yeah.
was racist and that
Oh,
he
for
needed to get
sure.
beyond that.
But like, that's what I was saying
Yeah.
though, is that like, but it's something that again, like has been an issue is that Klingons, to take a Star Trek analogy from someone who's not a Star Trek fan,
You
to
got
be
it.
like the Klingons were the quote unquote monsters, and then JK, we were wrong and wrong about that.
Mhm.
So like as we as a culture and as societies and kind of around the world learn to talk to each other sometimes, we do start to understand that like our understanding of what makes a monster, again, that for me, that othering, that thing changes, and that really works into what like Nate was saying about D&D, because yeah, man, making orcs and dark elves and so many other races in the early D&D, they're just evil. Their alignment is just evil, so you kill them. We've learned to not maybe be a little more nuanced in what we're doing, and that does make some people angry, and I don't care personally. But that's just me. But yeah, like I think that there's a lot. God, this is just a really complicated topic. What do we get
Nathan pulled the
into?
I
gold
want to ask
mine.
another question
No,
here.
for sure. Like it's a great topic, and like Nate makes great points with like how our understanding changes over time.
Okay. So my next question is, where do you think the fascinating, because media is full of monsters. However you want to define monsters, all the definitions we've given are present in media in various forms. So what is the fascination with monsters?
I think for me, monsters are sort of like just our fascination in general with storytelling. It's a way to expand our natural world that as we understand it, to include things that are supernatural, things that we couldn't do ourselves, and the monster is that boundary between our world and the other world. It always represents something that within the context of our culture as the dangerous limit, whether it is an alien on a spaceship, or the monster in the forest or whatever. It represents the boundary of our world and how we should be wary of it. But it allows us to explore things that are like, what does it mean to be human? What is it? How do we define ourselves as people? It creates that boundary to create a definition of what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Corey?
Can you like wait, go over the exact question again? Because I was
What-
very
what-
paying attention to Nate. And
What is our fascination with monsters? Why do we have so many shows, books, games that have monsters?
I can only speak for this on a personal level, and it comes from like based on my definition of a monster again, is this idea that like for my fascination has always been a kinship with the monster in a lot of ways, depending on the monster. I'll make it very clear. Like I don't feel a kinship with every monster. But like, I mean, growing up, growing up queer, to put it out there, there's a lot to unpack there, and always being seen as sort of especially in the 80s and 90s, as being kind of a monster. And even now, there's a lot of that comes into play with it. So you kind of look for characters and people who are treated kind of the same as you for maybe things that are not in their control. And I don't want to say this like I'm not talking about like serial killers here. I'm not talking about that sort of like villain or anything like that. Specifically, like I mean, I had a great like I've talked about my love of Godzilla on this show before. I've talked about my love of these creatures that didn't ask to be this way, but are this way, and how society views you out of that. And I think it's very easy for people who grew up on the outside of these things, for whatever reason. It can be not just be that, it's so many different reasons that we do find them compelling because it's a story about someone that you feel just a little bit of kinship to in there. You feel like, no, this is not my story, but it's a little like my story in a way, which is it's weird to say it out loud and it's weird to talk about. But like growing up, like I always loved monster movies. I loved Godzilla. I loved watching vampires and werewolves, especially. Like that was a big thing for me. This idea of like you just have this thing that like that's inside of you that makes you what you are. And you can't control it all the time and you can't like change it. It is just part of you inside of you. And I think a lot of people across the spectrum of just life, like not even necessarily my point of view, feel that in a lot of ways. And I think that's what kind of draws us into these narratives about these creatures. I mean, Frankenstein, like how many people over, gosh, it's been what, like, 200 years since that was written. How many people have felt a kinship with Frankenstein's creature? Like how many people have felt like the creature in some way or another?
Daviar?
Woo, 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 woo. All right. This week on a very special episode of the 42 Cast.
Feels like it. I'm sorry.
Are
I'm
you about
sorry.
to have your catharsis like Steve?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. No, because I think this is no, Corey, that wasn't a line to you. That's like to this subject, I think. Because I think that's an interesting question of what is the fascination with monsters to ask a geek podcast. Because I think all of us in the geek sphere have a very much a unique connection to monsters because of the sense of the other. And I think if you compound that then with particular identities that we have within the identity, whether it be queer, whether it be black, or whatever that may be, whether it be white, whatever that may be, I think that compounds again, like what that particular fascination is for you. I agree with what Corey said. Frankenstein is my favorite book of all time, and there's a reason that Netflix has a movie this year, 200 years later, that is still relevant about this character. Because I think, and with all of us, it's like the monster just becomes this entity for you to put whatever your otherness is on that, or your fascination with the other on that. And I think as humans, as people, we innately have a fascination with the other, whatever that may be, something that is outside of us and what we know, outside of my sense of self. Because there's an initial sense of what is that, and then I get to shape, well, how do I feel about that thing? Is it fascinating to me? Am I drawn to it, or is it terrifying? But no matter which one it is, either one of those things still pulls you into it. Whether you're terrified of it, whether you're angered by it, whether you love it, it all pulls you into it and gives you an emotional connection to it. So there are so many different ways we can connect to a variety of monsters. One of my favorite horror characters has always been the werewolf. Because again, of like the tragic sense of the person becoming the beast, and and then kind of like the kind of Incredible Hulk kind of symbiosis that's kind of with that's with that. So there are just so many things that you can pull from the creature that makes it endlessly fascinating over time. Because I think we all have a sense of, again, to close it out for me, is we all have a sense of the other within ourselves. And so we pick those monsters and we connect to those monsters because of whatever is reflecting in us that connects us or frightens us. And I think that pulls us in.
Yeah, that's not the first time I've heard the Hulk compared to werewolves, but also on topic, I've heard him described, and I think Stan Lee was the one who described it this way as Frankenstein's monster merged with Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah.
And so again, like two sort of monstrous, sort of things that get discussed around the sort of same spaces. But again, like the sort of idea of you're turning into, the monster, but also the monster is a misunderstood character much in the Frankenstein's monster vein. So yeah.
Mhm.
Steven, why do you think we're fascinated with monsters?
It's a really good question, and I have to admit that I'm fascinated by Corey and Devior's answers, because they have a perspective that I don't have, and I really appreciate that perspective because I I feel like I have a different I have a different privilege as a white male. I've not been othered. I'm not othered. And so I don't have that experience to see those stories in that way. And I feel like I want to see them more that way. But I also like to explore the like almost the historical why we're so captivated. I think from a perspective of from a non-othered perspective, there is that sense of threat and that random threat. And I think that's a big part of why we get fascinated because we perceive that threat, whether it's I think of the things of like why an average murder on TV gets, a little bit of interest here and there, but a serial killer captivates the nation for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I think it's that randomness of threat, that thing that this could be a threat to me, even though I have no connection to this. And so in a film sense, it could be that this poses a threat to characters that I'm identifying with because they're setting us up with these characters that we're identifying with. And now this monster is threatening those characters, even though they have no connection either. They've just sort of randomly wandered in and now they're a target. And it's that chaos. There's a feeling of wanting to try to figure out why this monster is doing what it's doing, to put order to some simple order to this chaos, to make sense of it, because it just seems so senseless. And I think that's part of what captivates us in this, is to understand and to put some sense of order to it. And it raises our blood pressure and it thrills us, and there's that too. But I think it's that sense of wanting to really kind of understand what's motivating this, so that I don't feel that threat because, I don't have this connection to this monster. So why am I feeling this threat? So trying to understand that, I think, is what part of what captivates us.
Yeah, Stephen, you got one of the things that you brought up was the thing that, as far as I could tell, and not having the perspectives of Daviar and Corey, the thing that I was surprised no one had brought up yet until you was the thrill aspect, the idea of it creates tension, it creates fear when we see these movies, and then like sort of like the release when somebody gets away from the monster or is not harmed, or they defeat the monster or something like that, where it's kind of like, which is why horror movies, that's one of the things that people go to horror movies for, is for that sort of whole tension and release and all of that kind of thing. That's part of that as a genre. So I definitely think that that's part of it, if it's not the whole reason.
Yeah. I want to throw in on Steven. I think it's also a catharsis that the monster, that overcoming this battle of order versus chaos, which is something that's universal. It's something that, you have your left, right, your conservative, liberal points of view, not big L, big, I'm talking little c, little L's. But you also have an order versus chaos Z-axis that you can
gonna plot this.
Yeah, we need to.
Do we need a three-dimensional graph?
We're back to geometry, aren't we?
Is it time for math?
We just had a Z-axis added.
You can leave me out. I'm not good at math.
It has to do with cultural context, because Godzilla, for us, is a monster movie, but for the Japanese, was a reaction to World War II, to the nuclear bombs, and Godzilla represents America and nuclear bombs.
I'm not sure that's either or.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they can be both.
I think all of these things can kind of be both because
Yeah, maybe.
especially
Yeah, but I'm just thinking like,
yeah, because
yeah.
culturally monsters represent things
Mhm.
in and represent certain threats, especially as we chart the course of their usage through the decades from our early monster movies till now, especially. You can kind of see how we as a culture have addressed those threats to build on what you're saying, Nate. Because yeah, for us, monster like the original Godzilla movie is like, oh, he's like smashing Tokyo. For like the Japanese, it's like this is about nuclear powers and the bombs dropping.
This is
Did you
about
know that?
angering America and
Yeah,
we get
and
destroyed, and how do we
the
reconcile
original,
that?
specifically
And that's
the
the
original
catharsis I
Godzilla
was
film.
talking about.
Yes,
Is that
yeah.
I wanted to get to is that was a catharsis for them as a culture.
Yeah.
And to your point, Corey, and getting back to the question you asked me, because I've been thinking about it in the back of my head, vampires have changed. If we go back into folklore,
Yes.
vampires are magically evil, right? You
Oh
become
my
a
gosh.
vampire, you
Yes.
become cursed, and you become evil. Like there's
Mhm.
nothing you can do about it. You are just evil. I would say that's a monster. Now, as we go through time, a lot of times vampires aren't even defined as magical. It's like a science fiction transformation that happens, and they're just people who crave blood. And so then they're more like to what I would call like a character, where
Yeah.
they like have reason and they can choose not to drink blood or choose to get it from another source or whatever. And so like they it's not like they're magically forced. I will prey on people because the magic has changed me into something that preys on
Right.
people.
Well, because the original vampire folklore, if you go back and look at it, specifically European folklore, because I
Mhm.
know many different cultures have very different ideas of vampires and they come across from a different globe. European folklore, it's like a vampire is a corpse. It's a corpse and it
Mhm.
wakes up
Mhm.
and it's going to sit on you and it's going to eat you. It's going to kind of like, devour you basically. So that idea is nothing like the vampires we have today, for sure. And again, yeah. So, but
It's more like
yeah,
zombies.
yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
it's more like
It goes
ghouls.
back to
Sorry. Do we want to be
Javier's.
really pedantic?
Right.
It's more like ghouls,
Sure, go. Hit
not
me.
like zombies. Because
No,
Ramiro
not on a
made
nerdy
movies
podcast.
about ghouls, not about zombies. We just started calling them zombies because zombies don't exist outside of Haitians. It's fine. It's fine.
Well,
I'm not
actually,
gonna go.
Steven.
Well, yeah, I'm not. Let me
Actually,
push up my glass. Well, actually, let me.
There,
Sorry.
there will be a chart available for those of you.
Will it have a
listening.
Z-axis?
I was being silly. I was sorry. Like I
No,
that
no,
was one of
I-
my.
No,
I
it's
have-
fine.
I
have
deserve that
many-
completely.
I have many folklore soapboxes. We don't have
If
time.
you
want to
be pedantic, this is the show to do it on.
I think
this
I've-
is the pedantic show.
I think I've proven that more than once here. But no, I do think it's a great thing to talk about. Is like how what we view as the monster has changed over time. As like again, as Nate said, Godzilla in the 50s for us was just a fun monster movie. It wasn't for the Japanese. But if you look at like what we view, like again, look at the rise of the slashers just in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
What does that represent in American culture of how we look at monsters and what we viewed as scary in the 50s, which was largely big nuclear ants and big creatures that were like mutated due to atomic, power, into the 60s and then to the 70s when you see this rise of these like 70s and like I think early 80s where you see this rise of like, well, first you see the rise of quote unquote zombies, and then also you see the rise of the slashers where we started being more afraid of a human threat again. And I think that's really fascinating.
Well, and to that point, Corey, on this broad topic of monsters, I think
so
what was
big.
so interesting about the slasher was that it was not only it was the threat also to suburbia.
Yes.
Because it was also
Yes.
about the white, safe suburban neighborhood that all of a sudden has this madman coming through and killing all
Yeah.
of us nice people.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah,
that
called the
threat-
shadow.
Well,
Yeah,
The
yeah.
shadow moves
Which
into
is
the
why
neighborhood.
Yeah.
slashers
Yeah.
were predominantly white in the late 70s and 80s because it's a threat to white suburban
The
life
whiteness.
specifically. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I think that is a fascinating look at I think one of the one of the interesting things is looking at how our definitions of monsters changes through time,
Yes.
because it shows just kind of where our national psychosis just is, and what is the thing that we're really afraid of. That again makes monsters so interesting, because whatever we as a nation are processing as our enemy at that point is manifested into a particular monster, and then becomes, and for however long it is until we find the next thing. But
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
I think yeah.
how many things do you see now that are like classic monsters that are like created by a virus? You know, like now it's not zombies like are magical, it's the zombie virus, or
Yeah.
vampirism is a virus that you would get infected when you get bitten, and
Worms,
like all
yeah.
that stuff. And it's like, and you can tell that it's like, oh yeah, like, there are all these like pandemics that have happened, and people are like worried about the idea of like a viral outbreak and whatnot, and so that becomes like the new monster is the
Yeah.
virus just
Especially
makes. Yeah.
Yeah, especially in that period of like the early 2000s had a lot of virus movies, and then in the early 2020s you saw a lot of virus movies. Because like if you look at now, like the biggest movies in 2025 when it comes to horror, when it comes to monsters, like when you think about this year, what do you think the biggest monsters for 2025 are?
I don't operate in
Well,
this
see, that's
space
Oh,
very
interesting.
much,
okay. No, I
so
mean, like
I'm
I
not
watch
the
a lot
best
of
person
horror.
to
I'm
ask.
sorry, this is like my
But
genre,
that's
so it's
but
just
that's
kind of
interesting, Corey, because
yeah,
if we look at our two biggest horror movies this year, it's been Sinners and Weapons,
yeah,
which are two completely different things.
so different.
That I
Witches
don't
and
know what's
vampires.
yeah, I don't know what it's saying about where our current psychosis is. So please, what do you have?
I mean, I so specifically, okay, I love Sinners and I love Weapons, and I hate when
Mhm,
people pit them against each other because they're two entirely different types of movies. So I'm going to
mhm.
go on record saying that. I'd also bring into the conversation Bring Her Back, if anyone saw that,
Yep.
which I think
Yep.
is a great movie about grief specifically. And I think that's what both Weapons and Bring Her Back have in common is poorly handling grief, because I think both at the
Hmm.
core of both of those movies is dealing with something terrible that has happened, and how dealing with something terrible that can happen, how we react to it kind of determines who we are and whether we become monstrous or not in a lot of ways. Whereas, I mean, like, I don't know if I'm the best like qualified to tackle Sinners as much as I love it, because there's so much to talk about in Sinners in terms of like colonialization, in terms of like how we as society, what the difference between like assimilating in a society and becoming like integrated into society, and how we define those two things. Because yes, the threat is vampires, but it's so much bigger than that. And like Ryan Coogler is phenomenal, and like I could do an entire podcast talking just about Sinners, and that will get us off topic. But like Remick as the vampire in that film is a threat, but there's also the secondary threats that come into that film too, that again, like I would love to talk about,
Yeah.
but that
Like
would
who's
just
the
be
real threat in that
who is
movie?
the real threat in Sinners when you really think about it? Like, what is that?
Cultural appropriation.
That right there. Yeah, that is a huge one. And the KKK, but but yes, for sure. Like that is the big threat in Sinners to talk about, is this idea of becoming being forcibly assimilated into something that you did not choose, and like that. I don't know, I could talk about Sinners for a long time. But that kind of takes us off in that. Like, again, what is a monster in 2025 looks very different than what is a monster 10 years ago. It looks very different than what is a monster in the 90s. That is what we deal with, what is relevant to us. And I think that kind of pulls from, if you ask yourself, what is your favorite monster? I think that's going to tell you something about yourself too.
Well, it's funny that you said that, Corey, because that was the question I was going to ask. So
Did I
why don't
accidentally
you?
segue
So good at this
me?
job. So
Yeah,
good
you
at the segue.
segued.
So good at the
So
segue.
Corey, what is your favorite monster?
Oh
Ooh.
my gosh.
Wow.
I talked about, I really have always loved werewolves just as a genre, as a fiction. I've read a lot of werewolf fiction. I watched a lot of werewolf films.
Is there a
Um,
specific if werewolf is your pick, is there a specific like
Mm.
thing, like you're gonna say this is my favorite
I mean,
werewolf movie or
I
character?
there's a lot of really great werewolf movies out there that I really like, but I do like the idea of, I mean, American Werewolf in London is a masterpiece. However, I'm not going to talk about John Landis, and but I'm talking just about the film. Like, I'm divorcing that from that, but like that's probably my favorite werewolf movie. because it's this idea of you don't know what's happening to you. Like I mean, yeah, his dead best friend is right there. I love this movie so much, but like there's so much about the film is like not understanding the changes that are happening to you. And you could say thing like Ginger Snaps is another great example of that as well, that is tied largely into like female coming of age sort of story as well. Um, but I really like Silver Bullet, the Stephen King one that nobody ever talks about. I love that one. I grew up on that one as well. There's another one very in the same vein, Late Phases, really great too. I could talk about werewolf movies all day too. But yeah, I like there's something terrifying about the idea of changes to yourself that you can't explain, that you can't really describe, and you can't tell anyone about. Because there's also this idea of your body betraying you, which is why I'm also really drawn to body horror films for the same vein, because I think that there's something terrifying about that aspect.
I hate body horror, but anyway.
Oh, I love. Oh, okay. Well, like you can never watch Cronenberg with me. Sorry, Nathan.
I've been very open about the fact that I don't do horror movies usually.
I know.
A lot of the ones that I have
but-
seen are much older horror movies. So when I have actually seen
And you've probably seen
Werewolf in
like
London.
The Thing as well, which is another one of my all-time favorite horror films, which again is this idea of paranoia and betrayal of other people, and are the people that you think they are really who they are, which comes into that kind of idea of what is a monster, what is a person, et cetera, so forth. Yeah.
Steven, what is your favorite monster?
Gosh, that's a tough because I'm also not much of a horror movie person. So
No, they don't always show up in horror movies. I mean, I would say, just for something I know that you like, Doctor Who does have its share of monsters, no matter how you define it. So, I mean,
it
like,
does. It does, I guess, if you, or aliens, or whatever you
well,
want.
I'm saying there are true monsters also,
sure.
like, regardless of your definition,
Yeah, there are a few, but I think, I don't know, I kind of like Frankenstein's monster. A lot, and I think one of the things that as I think about like in time, like if a lot of these films, have had this sort of perceived threat against us, and that's what's kind of drawn us to them, then as Corey had noted that we tend to other the monster, and we do this with people that we term as monsters too. We tend to other them as well and divorce them from being a part of humanity. And but as we retell these stories over and over again, you can only rephrase these threats so many times. So what it causes us to do as storytellers, and we see this in films a lot, is we start to look into what builds the monster. Corey was talking about American Werewolf in London, and talking about like, from now we're seeing from the perspective of the werewolf, and we're seeing, vampires. We're starting to see like, from the perspective of becoming a vampire. And so it helps us. What we're seeing is an attempt to almost kind of understand the threat as we kind of put order to the chaos. We're trying to understand the other. And I think that's kind of interesting to me, because that tells me that us as humanity can see past this othering that we do to people who are not like us, to kind of understand who they are. So I think there's a real promise to horror movies, even though it's not really kind of my genre. So yeah, finding a particular favorite is, I like good stories. Tell me a good story with it, and I'm with you.
I mean, that is a good point, because there have been a lot of things recently, or even like somebody has become a zombie, but they retain their personality or whatever. There was like iZombie. There was like a streaming show.
Warm Bodies.
No, there was something else that was called like San
Clarita.
San.
Oh, San Clarita Diet.
Yeah,
San Clarita Diet.
Yeah.
Really good show. Got canceled way too early.
But so I think you're right, Steven. It's like attempting to understand the other through like those sorts of things, where it's like, humanizing the monster.
And that's great. That's great. I think, more of that. Bring on more of that. I would love to see more of that.
Caviar?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of ways I could have gone with this, because I think my favorite is typically going to be the tragic monster, quote unquote. But going off of my initial premise, that I think that the human being always has the potential to be the greatest monster, I think my favorite monster is going to be Jekyll and Hyde or Mr.
Mm.
Hyde, because it has always been from reading the Robert Louis Stevenson book. It has always been my thinking that the serum is not the serum doesn't act is not real. That yes, there is a liquid that he drinks, but it doesn't actually turn him. That it is this person having an excuse to experience what it is to let your inhibitions go. And to Stephen, to what you brought up earlier, our fascination with the serial killer and like why that story lasts so long, why these documentaries about serial killers always just endlessly just come out and are always hits. I've always had the thought that there is a fascination and an excitement that people have of, man, what would it be like to just let the inhibitions go, let the rules go, and just do whatever the heck I wanted to do. And to me, that is kind of that inhibitionless human that is wreaking havoc on London under the guise of, but what can I do? It's the serum. That to me is just like a concept about humanity, about us and what our inner desires could be. That kind of makes Mr. Hyde, so Jekyll and Hyde, like my favorite monster to kind of play with and think about.
Okay. Nate?
I've been thinking about everybody's definitions of monster and trying to find the one universal thing that we could all agree, no matter what, how you define monster,
A universal
is.
monster?
And it's something we haven't actually talked about. So it might be a little cheating, but cosmic horror, and I'm thinking King in Yellow is for me what scares me the most. The
Okay.
King in Yellow is I think most simply described as a virus on reality brought about by creative obsession. If the story is if there's a play called The King in Yellow, and if a creative person reads this play, they become obsessed with it. They want to perform it. They want to share it. They want to create art. If they're a painter, they paint the play. If they're a writer, they write extra scenes. They write a prologue. They write an epilogue. If they're if they're a musician, they write music that goes along with the play. And then eventually, the world of the King of Yellow merges with our own, scoops up our reality, and takes it back. And the idea of creative obsession, because I'm a person who has ADHD, so I tend to hyper focus on things that I become obsessed with. And the idea of that creative obsession that I value in myself is ultimately my undoing of all of my reality around me is terrifying. It is something that when I read The King in Yellow, I am scared to my very core, not just my mortal being, but my very soul.
Nate,
So,
sorry to interrupt, Nathan, but Nate, if I can ask, I really appreciate that. And as an artist, do you like the movie Black Swan? Thinking on that premise,
yes.
because Black
Yep.
Swan is to me
Yep.
is one of my
Black Swan,
is
same
my
thing.
all-time favorite movies about
It's in there.
artistic obsession and the darkness of that.
Artist.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of art around it. I think maybe because artists are afraid to actually talk about that darkness
Hmm.
that exists within us.
Yes.
But yeah,
To achieve greatness, yes.
to achieve greatness.
Yeah, and it's also this like it ties into this idea like cosmic horror, as you said, which as a genre is knowing the unknowable will
Mhm.
ruin you. And as an
Mhm.
artist, I think that's like I'm not an artist, so
Because it's all
make that
about
very
art
clear.
and truth.
Yeah, and so knowing the truth in the seeking a truth
Mhm.
can lead you to a bad end,
And you
which
to ruin.
yeah, and I appreciate that kind of idea that like what the monster is in a lot of these cosmic horror stories and things like that is something you cannot describe. So it's beyond comprehension in a way. And that is what makes it terrifying. So seeking it out, for example,
Mhm.
with the King in Yellow, like seeking this out and like becoming obsessed with it will ruin you because first of all, you'll never be able to live up to this unknowable thing. So
Mhm.
you keep seeking and seeking this higher like purpose and like that is yeah, as you said, leads to your
Yeah.
ruin. I love the concept. Like I love cosmic horror for that reason. And
Mhm.
The King in Yellow is not something that I think about that often because I haven't gone back and revisited those short stories in a very long time, which by the way are not Lovecraft. That's Chambers who wrote those. But I maintain that the
It's
best
in the
cosmic
oeuvre.
horror I maintain that the Beth Mistos stories were not actually Lovecraft. They were everyone who
Oh
came
yeah.
after him. I have that maybe unpopular opinion. So yeah, I that is but then that's again the monstrous. Is it a monster? What is it? What is this obsession? Can you call it a monster? Like
Mhm.
what does that become?
All right,
So I found
Nathan.
this interesting because I worded this question deliberately. So some of you responded with the thing you're most afraid of, and some of you responded more with like a thing that you're fascinated by, which, those things are not
Mhm.
necessarily mutually exclusive, but I think, like Stephen, you were talking about like Frankenstein's monster and things like that, where it's like I don't think you're scared of Frankenstein's monster.
No.
You just find it interesting as sort of like an idea. So so because I did word it that way, I'm not gonna go with what I'm scared of the most. My favorite monster, because it is all the things that I said. It is unknowable. It is, animalistic and all of that. But I absolutely adore it, is Mothra. Because
Mm.
Mothra is,
My baby girl is not a monster. What are you saying? It's okay.
by
Sorry. Go
definition,
She
a
ahead.
has her own
kaiju is a
agenda. That's
monster.
unknowable agenda.
But it's the softest, cutest, cuddliest monster that you're ever gonna find.
Not my baby girl.
And I love the fact that like Mothra, is basically a monster that fights for Earth. Right?
Yeah.
Like Mothra
Mhm.
is like, I mean, really, if you look at it, the subtext is
Sweetie.
the epitomization of Mother Nature. So again, it is an inhuman force, that's sort of like epitomized within the monstrous figure that is, sort of created there. And it is something that you can be fearful of. The original
Mhm.
Mothra movie that was just Mothra and didn't have Godzilla or any of the other kaiju in it was about like the terror of Mother Nature after you've basically desecrated Mother Nature, right? Like it's the force of that nature turned against humanity. But generally it's used nowadays as like the force that sort of defends against these other monsters that are more totally destructive and whatnot. So I was surprised how much when I did my watch through of all of the Toho, kaiju movies, how much I really loved Mothra, that I was just like, oh, it's Mothra. I love Mothra,
His
And
best
Mothra will
girl.
talk smack to the other monsters, which is also really good.
Mothra is the most cuddly of the monsters.
Right,
She's
yeah.
She's furry,
more-
she's
She's
best
More
girl.
cuddly than Son of Godzilla.
yeah.
Yes. Yes,
Yes.
that thing needs to
Godzuki.
die.
That thing is terrifying.
But now I want to know what you're scared of.
Yeah, what would you say you're scared of?
Well, I haven't done an exhaustive analysis here, but if you ask me what I'm most afraid of,
Yeah.
probably it's a xenomorph. Um, the the first of
hunger.
all, let's start with the face huggers, okay? Like
We're gonna
Suffocation.
unpack. Like, do we want to talk about xenomorphs? Because there's so much to unpack there.
I mean, we can. I'm just the thing latches onto your face. Or
Mhm.
it doesn't help that I saw Alien when I was like 5 or something. So,
Yeah.
there's something of that in there too. But it launches onto your face, shoves eggs down your throat, and you can't do anything about it. Right? Like
It's almost like it's a metaphor for something.
and then like it erupts out of your stomach. And that's just terrifying, right? Like you think it's fine, everything's okay, and then like it just like bursts out of you and you're dead. And then the thing grows up into a full grown, like the ultimate killing machine, thing that if you're one of the people it didn't, implant, is then going to like come and get you, and no matter where you hide or where you go, it's there and all of that. Like, yeah, I find xenomorphs. And just the look is just, again, it's that alien sort of, try to look like something that doesn't really look like anything you find on Earth, very distorted, even though it does have like arms and legs. I know that some of the later lore says that whatever like it is implanted in, it looks more like that. So like you can have ones that don't look humanoid, but I'm used to it looking like the humanoid look where they've come out of people. And so I haven't seen all the Alien. I've seen a few of them. But and it's terrifying, looks and everything. So yeah, I think the xenomorphs are pretty scary.
Haven't seen all of them.
No, I should one day. Well, see, I
Corey,
felt I
it's a
felt
hard judge,
Yeah,
Corey.
I was really
I've got a lot of
disappointed
judgment.
that after the second movie they basically like retconned a lot of stuff, and like the second movie to me is like one of like the great movies of the great action movies of all time. And
Yeah.
like when they said that Newt had been implanted in the second movie, and I was like, I'm not even gonna watch the third or the fourth movie. And
Just
so
don't.
like yeah, I didn't like the retcon.
It's
The
not really.
continuity of 3 and 4 are about as good as the continuity of the of the Predator movies. Like you just ride along. Just
Yeah.
ride along.
I haven't seen a lot of those either, to be fair.
I could have flipped my desk over at you right now.
I've
I
only
can't.
actually in the
I
Predator
cannot.
movies,
I'm going
like
to-
the first one, I saw that awful Alien versus Predator movie, which wasn't like the comic at all. Like
Wait,
the comic Alien versus
wait,
Predator
the first
is really
one or
good.
the second movie? Hang on. I'm gonna judge you. Is this the first AVP or the second
first
AVP?
one.
The first one's
First
fun.
one.
The second one's
No.
In the South
unwatchable.
Pole. The
Yes,
South Pole?
I really like the first one. Is it good?
The first
I'm
one
not
says that
saying
there
it's
was an
good.
Aztec civilization 10,000 years ago. Like,
They're
and
not.
I'm
No,
like,
it's not
you've already got the
Aztec.
time wrong. Like,
It's not.
It wasn't Aztec because it was on
It
the South
wasn't
Pole.
Aztec. Yeah,
Or
it's not an
Mayan.
Aztec civilization. It's not a Mayan civilization. It's like it's a predator civilization. The
but
predators
they literally
did it.
said either Mayan or Aztec. I can't remember which one in the movie. Like that's what it was.
Okay,
And I
but
was like,
you look, if you're gonna look at archaeological notes from a sci-fi movie, you do have to start
but
you want to
but
talk
either
about
way,
Stargate because
either
that's
way,
a whole other
the
can of worms.
comic is actually good. The Alien versus Predator comic,
Yeah.
but it takes place in the future, and it's not like something that takes
Yeah.
place in modern day, and it's not like and it has like an actually really good plot and really good character. Like the main character is really awesome, and
You should see the new movie.
It's
if
been
you like
so
the
long
comics.
since I've seen AVP, I can't really talk very intelligently about it because it's so dim in my memory.
All right, that's a
But-
new episode. We're gonna put
Right.
this on the list.
Right.
Put this on the
Put
list,
this on the
Nathan,
list.
right now. Let's go.
Predator
Let's go.
retrospective.
No, the new Predator movie is good actually. If we want to talk
Yeah,
about
it is.
monsters not being
Yeah, I've heard
monsters,
that.
because the new movie is the first film that's like from the perspective of the predator, unlike all the other films. And like,
Yeah.
I find the Predators very fascinating in the concept of monster movies because it starts out as this unknowable, unkillable creature. If you like the first couple of films, and then as the comics is lore from the comics starts to trickle in and things like that, you find a little bit more about the society, and that's in the first two films. Like, don't get me wrong, the fact that it won't kill like non-combatants and all this other stuff, but like by the time you get to like Predator Badlands, you're like, oh no, I'm having a really good time with this movie. Because of that, the monster becomes a character, to use your like definition.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I actually didn't read the comics first. There were novels that were written that were in the AVP, and I read those first. And so you really get inside inside the heads of the characters. And even
I've not read the novels, just some of the comics, like some of the original comics. So
yeah, and so I really like that. No, it's always been on my short list that I should go back and watch like all the Alien movies or watch all the Predator. It's always in the back of my head that I should do that, but like I've just never sunk the time into hunting them down and watching them.
Put it on the list.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, like we've talked about a lot of stuff here. I'm not sure we've come to a great conclusion as far as
If anything, we broadened it.
like
yes.
Yeah. We've all
Were we
talked
supposed
about
to
like, sort of
answer
our own
this?
viewpoints.
Yeah.
No, what were we supposed to answer
were we gonna-
exactly?
Are we going to have a conclusion? You didn't say there was going to be
I
a
was
conclusion at the end.
interested to see if we could hash out what a monster is and isn't. And we're kind of
Yeah.
various places here.
Yeah.
I mean,
Which I don't think we have to. I was just
Yeah.
curious if we could do that.
I think
I
we
think
can
it
all
depends on culture.
Yeah, I think that we can agree that the concept of a monster has changed so much over time, and it is a very personal thing for a lot of people, because what some people find monstrous, other people do not, and what other people view as the other, some other people find comfort in. And I think that makes it hard to determine what a monster is. I would say that I think if we're going to do a universal definition, fear has to be involved. If we're going to go with what makes a monster and not in the to keep it PG monster enthusiast perspective that I come from. Uh we have to, yeah, Nathan is. We have to be able to come from a concept of like, are you afraid of it?
Mhm.
But fear is such a vast and different thing as you were talking about, like, because our favorite monsters, other than like you and like Nate, like what are we actually afraid of? And that will determine like what we view as monstrous.
Well, and that's why I do find it interesting because, like, some people they don't find the monsters scary, right? Like,
Hmm.
like you might find other kinds of monsters, but there are monsters you actually like that you would still
Yeah.
call monsters, but you like them. Like you have you're always talking. I mean, I don't know what Mothman is actually, Corey, but you're always like talking about Mothman and how much you love Mothman and everything. So,
I think Corey likes Mothman.
I just a
Do you,
little.
do you have affectionate feelings for
I
Mothman?
I mean, I do. I am a Mothman enthusiast as well. I do very much
Okay.
appreciate it.
It's an Americana for
It
folklore
like
cryptid.
I come from a very like folklore background.
Hmm.
So these cryptids and these creatures that have both in folklore and in what I would call like cryptids, which are like more modern folklore. Because like if you look at the Mothman's background, he comes from like what, the 60s. Um,
Mhm.
did you know, speaking of cryptids, the Fresno Nightcrawler came from like 2012?
Hmm.
Just putting that out there. So we are still creating like these folklore monsters
Yeah.
and creatures today. So that is kind of my segue, is that like we are still creating new monsters now. We're creating these new creatures that fascinate us and kind of
Yeah.
terrify us at the same time. And then we'll build them into the vernacular and talk about them like they've always been a fear, but they haven't been. A lot of them have an origin point. Like Mothman. I love Mothman.
Well, yeah, I
I'm
was
very
shocked. A friend of mine who lives on the eastern shore of Maryland was talking about the Chesapeake Bay monster,
Mhm.
Mhm.
which is, Chessie, which
Yeah.
is basically like the Loch Ness
Yes.
monster in
Like a,
Scotland. And he's done all this. He's a historian. And he's
yeah.
now published a book on the history of the Chesapeake Bay monster and like all the sightings. And, he's tried to, basically create like sort of thesis about like the societal conditions that cause people to, start seeing, this
Yeah.
monster or whatnot. But like
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, like, but I was surprised that something in fairly recent history, because this is like the 1800s when people start seeing this thing, and it's like that they've created this new, like monster that just sort of,
I mean,
people have seen
y-
over time, even as late as
yeah.
like the 70s, 80s, I think he's saying was the last big one where a lot of people were reporting that they saw it, around the same time. So,
You've
yeah.
got Bessie from the Great Lakes, like Lake Erie, like all
Oh,
these
really?
Great Lakes. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of
Yeah.
like lake monsters out there.
Hmm.
Well,
Camp.
and I mhm. Well, and I think if anything, I think that's what this speaks to most to me is this conversation. What it enlightened is just, Corey just kind of set it up, I think, perfectly there, and just like how these monsters are so expansive and are constantly evolving because it's a way for us to process things that we don't understand or that we are afraid of. It is a way for us to put the things to find something to be the avatar for whatever that we're trying to process or deal with within ourselves or within our society. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating. I think that's what makes it such a powerful like entity and like fiction. And not just in horror, but across all genres, really. I mean, because I think, we focused on like the horror sci-fi, but if we wanted to, we really could have expanded out of that and just gone into monsters represented in drama.
Yeah.
Things
I
Well,
like
yeah,
mean,
that.
because I mean, like
that's
that, to
perfectly
your
said.
definition, like the CEO that like
Mhm.
doesn't care about the cost in human life, but it will like help his bottom line or whatever, is a monster because of the
Mhm.
fact that it's they don't care about the harm that they're or even I guess polluting and destroying
100%.
like
Mhm.
people's lives or whatever would also be like a monster in that sense, like because of the
Mhm.
fact that they are doing inhumane things without remorse
Mhm.
or without obvious remorse.
Yeah. Yeah. To the most innocent of us, even if it affects children. It's like, and it's like, and what more specific of a definition of a monster could there be? Where someone who I will happily harm a child if it puts money in my pocket. I mean, it's just like, wow. It's just something like that. So it's like, yeah, I think that's what makes it such a brilliant topic.
Well, and what I think is interesting about that, though, is because of the fact that, like, I don't think generally people think about that when they say monster, right? Like, because that kind of villain has always, we can go back and look at, like, plays written in, like, ancient Greece, and I'm sure we have something, like a king that's sort of like the same as that, or, you get what I'm saying? Like, the people in wealth and power and position who are also inhumane and callous, as far as like the consequences of their actions and whatnot. But I don't think that traditionally, like, those are viewed as monsters per se. And so that's why I find that interesting that to you, that's like the primary like definition of like what is a monster, rather than to me, that's like, well, that's a metaphor comparing them to a monster, but that's not literally like what they are. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure from their perspective, they would not consider themselves a monster,
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Just thinking of Richard III.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I
100%.
mean,
Yeah.
we certainly have plenty of examples in history and literature of, that kind of character.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so I mean, anything more that anyone wanted to say before we left where you're like, this is this one thing that we gotta talk about before we leave. So, Nate, do you have anything that we haven't like talked about where you're like, oh, when you said this topic, I wanted to talk about this and we haven't gone there yet?
I think the big things I wanted to talk about, I think we hit where it was what defines a monster is largely dependent on culture. You have to have a cultural context for it, but it always is the other. It is the thing we don't understand. It is the limit of our definition of what we find to be human at that time.
Yeah, I
That's
gotta
all.
say, as much as I've seen fear, that I didn't get the chance to comment on your thing before, the fear of the unknown, gets externalized a lot in various monster stories, but I think making the very concept of the unknown being the monster in your example, because while I've heard, I know what the Lovecraft, the great old ones and all that are by reading that them secondhand. I've never actually directly like read or seen anything like with them. So I do find that interesting though, like the idea that it, like, breaks your mind to even get exposed to the concept or the any point of knowledge
Yeah.
of these things because they are unknowable, like, and that's a whole direction that I hadn't even thought of
I have
with
some movie
this.
recs for you. So
Okay.
yeah, I'll get you. I got a starter pack. We'll get you a
Okay.
starter pack on that.
um Steven, anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to bring up?
Not specifically, but I didn't realize until this conversation tonight that there was an opportunity to, and maybe a need to, create a monster for Chicago for Lake Michigan. And I think we got to get on that.
Yeah, you can get on that, Steven.
I think we got to work on that. So now I have an item to work on. So thank you.
Did you want to mention about your direct connection to monsters?
Well, you mean the that I was in I do have an appearance in the television show Monster on Netflix in season 3 on episode 6 if you want to check that out. But yeah,
Watch that.
that's more of the person monster, but and I
Right,
do
right.
find it interesting to in that vein that those are obviously it's a series about serial killers, but they do title it Monster.
Right.
And
Mhm.
they went right with that name, so I thought that was interesting.
It's fascinating for all of the like killers they could have used for that. Like I'm looking at your background right now, which is the newest series. They
Yeah.
use Ed Gein, which is a like it's just it's an interesting choice. That's all I'll
Well,
say.
it's yeah, because and that's actually the series that I'm in, but that's because he was the basis for so many fictional serial
Mm-hmm.
killer characters. It was a really interesting choice, I thought. And they do make, they kind of bounce around. The next one is going to be Lizzie Borden, which is also I
Mhm.
think a really interesting choice.
Pretty cool.
Daviar, anything that you wanted to bring up that we haven't yet?
Just a quick shout out. I touched on it a little bit earlier to the tragic monsters being one of my favorite concepts. And and that's in lieu of this movie coming out next month, Primate, where the pet monkey from the trailer gets bitten by something and all of a sudden goes from this lovable, adorable monkey into something horrible. And I think about movies like Cujo. I think about movies like The Fly, where it is someone who becomes the monster through an accident or through like a mistake. And all of a sudden this person or this creature that was fairly like lovable and good, or all of a sudden becomes something monstrous. So that, like the tragic, and those things are always kind of heartbreaking because you know it has to end. It's not. It has to end in the darkest fashion possible. And it's often very tragic for me. And I think you can also put the creature from Frankenstein in this too, because it wasn't their fault per se.
Oh, definitely.
And yeah, so that's, yeah. Just shout out to like the tragic monster stories because I always love those, and I like how it has a combination of fear but also deep sympathy for what's happening in the story
Well,
as well.
King Kong is
Yeah, oh, yeah,
another like
all
one in
time.
that vein of
Hmm.
the idea of in his own environment, like King
Hmm.
Kong is shown with like some levels of nobility and is
Wow.
part of that whole the well, he's part of that ecosystem, he's part of that he fits in there, and he's taken somewhere to be exploited, and then
Yeah.
runs amok because he doesn't know what's going on or what's happening, and then he gets killed. So
I
I
mean,
mean
it's like
that's
if
Oh.
you look at the creature from the Black Lagoon, the creature wasn't bothering anybody until y'all came in there into
Hmm.
his house and started
Hmm.
bothering him. And Shin Godzilla, that's one of the biggest, most in the modern era is probably a really good one for the tragic creature that didn't ask to be this way. So
Yeah. Shout out.
Corey,
yeah.
anything else you want to bring up that we didn't?
I don't think so. I feel like I talk too much and I'm sorry. I have a
Oh,
lot
it's
of
fine.
soapboxes
Not
about
at all.
monsters. I no, I think we touched on a lot of good stuff. This is a really complicated topic. I think there's so many different things you could really branch into from here to talk about stuff, especially when it comes to how society treats others and how they depict them in fiction and different things like that, which is a whole other can of worms. But yeah, I think for like a kind of talking about monsters, I think we can all just kind of agree to a certain extent that it is very personal, like what we fear as a society and what we fear on a personal, like a microcosm level, really shapes the kind of media that gets made in any era, and that's why these monsters are so different through time.
Yeah, again though, it's so fascinating because like you're bringing up the othering, which to me my go-to with othering is always X-Men, right? But
Yeah.
like, we don't consider the X-Men monsters, even though some of them have
I
powers that
I'm
would
pretty
make
sure that
them
Nightcrawler
monstrous.
no, Nightcrawler's story is all about being called a monster
Well,
though.
being
Like,
called a monster, but I wouldn't call Nightcrawler a
but
monster. That's like what ignorant people like
you
call him. You know?
oh, really? Like, I
Oh
mean,
wow.
that's
Well,
kind
like
of
yeah, the
no,
people like with like pitchforks and stuff that
but
chase him away, like that's what like those people call him a
but
monster.
I do
Like,
think that a lot of that comes down to what is a monster is all about perspective.
mhm.
So I think like Nightcrawler or a character like that definitely falls under that trope because to look at him is to see a monster.
Or to see a character like Beast, who to look at
Yes.
Beast is
Hmm.
absolutely terrifying.
Yeah,
Before you
and
hear him talk and go, "Oh my God,"
yeah.
and again, yeah,
So
the
and that
metaphor of
is
those.
but like if you
Yeah.
you only don't think the X-Men are the monsters because we're in their perspective, which I think goes back to a lot of what Nate was saying and what Davio was saying and like all these different things is when you are in the perspective of the monster, the things that they are doing is not monstrous. When you're outside the perspective of the monster, it is. And I think that in fiction makes for a great monster. Now, if we're talking about real life serial killers or people, if we're watching like a Hannibal or something like that, we're fascinated by these people because they live outside of societal norms for so much. That's why true crime is so interesting. I think like I do want to say like Davier like touched on some really interesting things talking about real life like serial killers and why we find that true crime stuff so fascinating because there's this kind of idea of like what makes a person act that way, what creates that. And so but I kind of try to separate that between like humans who act monstrously versus someone who has either become something non-human or starting out as non-human because I think the way I think about them is different. So I think that maybe it might be my ending point, which maybe could open up a whole other conversation
Hmm.
sometime. I'm sorry, but yeah, it's a really complex issue. That's what I'll
Well,
say.
and see, that's the thing, and I know I'm kind of extending the length of this thing too, because like, do you consider mutants in the X-Men sense to be non-human? And so, because you were just saying that mutants could be monsters, and so like to
Yeah.
me, it's like mutants are humans, right? Like they just have like different, like a power or whatever, but that doesn't make them a monster because they're humans. Like I don't know, like
But if you
it's
look at a
interesting to me.
character like Sabretooth,
Yeah.
for example, uh, would you say that he is a monster or not? If we're gonna
Well,
go from
see,
an
I was
X-Men
the one who was
perspective.
arguing that like serial killers are not monsters; it's just a
Yeah.
metaphor. So
Yeah, and like
I would say that Sabretooth is not a
okay,
monster.
no, and like that's just my my
Right.
question.
That's
Yeah.
he's made choices in his life that are very like horrible,
Yeah.
but like he's not a monster. Yeah, that's my
Well,
POV.
yeah, and for me, like looking at the X-Men, I mean, for me, it is if I had to look at anyone, I would start with Magneto. Because even though I know the origins of Magneto, it is his single-mindedness in regards to eventually seeing non-mutants as the threat gives him he thinks the justification to do acts that he does, in some cases very foul and very, very destructive and harmful acts to people who could be innocent. But because of the prejudices that he's faced, I feel that it is the dark side of how he has become a monster, even though he was for much of his life the victim. And so to me, it is, I would normally, it wouldn't be Beast, it wouldn't be Nightcrawler, it wouldn't be Sabretooth, I would start with Magneto if I had to define who would be a monster in the X-Men world for me.
Really?
Mhm.
I mean, I have a T-shirt that says Magneto was right, so I'm maybe not the right person to have this conversation with. I say this is like I would put it towards somebody like Mr. Sinister, who is
Yeah.
my favorite X-Men villain. I view him as a very monstrous person, far more than Apocalypse or Magneto or any of the other or like even like Mojo. I would consider him far more monstrous than any of those other
Yeah.
villains.
Back in my live journal days, I had a Magneto is my hero live journal
Oh,
icon.
no.
So yeah, right. But then again, so that's the thing. So like,
Yeah.
I identify with Magneto because of the idea of Magneto seeing the injustices and whatnot. And it depends on what you're reading or watching with Magneto too, because he's been depicted wildly different.
Yeah, it really does depend.
100%.
Depending on who's
Yeah.
writing for
100%.
him and
But
how
isn't
much
the
of
story of Magneto that you become the villain that you are fighting
Yes.
against?
Yes.
that
And-
is
and-
one of the
Right,
things that
he
at some
becomes
point
the
some people have
mutant
tried to use
Nazi,
him for.
like-
Yeah, as far
Classically,
as-
I mean, it depends
Okay.
it depends on who's writing him and what story it is. But
as
yes, that
time
is the thing,
marches
the
on,
trope that
Magneto
happens with him.
becomes more and more reasonable.
And that's a whole other podcast.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it's true. It's true.
I do need to do just a generic X-Men podcast at some point.
I'm right here.
indeed.
Let's go.
That's all right, but okay, yeah, I don't think we came to any conclusions here. I've certainly learned a lot more about points of view, which is part of what I wanted from this, because I didn't think we would necessarily like have the answer, the ultimate truth. But that was the thing, like when I realized that the terms weren't even the same, that I was like, I just want to see like how wide of a net we can get here. And I think we've done that. I think we've gotten a lot of points of view on this. And I think we've kind of shown that this term monster maybe isn't the best term to use anyway, because of the fact that there's so little clarification on what that actually means. We all have a vague notion that kind of intersects with what other people feel, but it's not something that we all kind of agree on. So it's kind of interesting to me that there's this wide of a, and I would not have called that. I would have thought that it was a much narrower, thing, but that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, we definitely drew a fuzzy line around. And it's way over there.
I don't know. I think it's
over there.
I don't know. It's a line. I think
that's
it's
the
more
boundary.
I think
And
it's
we
more of
think
like
it's
a
over there
complex
somewhere.
four-dimensional, like
Yeah.
Concept of
shape.
a line.
Yeah, I think
the concept of a line.
Vague.
I think when you want to label something or someone a monster, it causes you to do a little introspection and ask yourself why.
Yeah,
you
it
want to use
says
that
more
term.
about who you are
Exactly.
than the person who's
the
committing
most fascinating thing to me, and the
atrocity.
thing I hadn't thought about, was what Corey brought up about like over time, like
Yeah.
it changes and how we depict things changes, and so that's something more I have to think about because that's a nuance I hadn't thought about with this topic. I kind of thought of it as fixed, but it's not either. So that's also a thing. But okay, hopefully we gave all of you at home something to think about too. So let's say your goodbyes and let people know where they can find us. Let's start with you, Stephen.
Goodbye. Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it. You can find me at Instagram at Mallets Before Thought. I have a linktree/Stephen Pickering, where you can find my clip of where I am in the TV show Monster, and some clips of other films that I've done, or sometimes links to entire films that I've done, or whatever I'm doing on stage next is all at that Linktree. So if you want to follow me, that's a good thing to see what I'm doing next.
Stephen, I have one final question for you.
Okay.
Did you do your part in Monster as Don Knotts?
Even though I was wearing a police uniform, it was very it was it would have been really tempting.
I'd love to see Don Knotts.
Come on, you could have just done a take, like
just we're gonna go look at
he nailed their kidneys to the wall.
I will say though that the props that they used were really good and very disturbing, even up close. I passed a chair that I swear I had to look at twice because it occurred to me that this was supposed to be a chair made of human skin, and it looked really good up close. So I'm sure it looked great on TV.
Oh, I hope they didn't actually go and get some human.
No, I don't. I think they did a really good job.
It's got to play in 4K.
It looked really disturbing.
All right, Nate.
Yeah. I quite famously do not post online, but I will plug something. For those of you that heard me talk about the Yellow King and you're like, want to know more about this, and if you don't want to read a really old book about cosmic horror, something that hews very close to the King in Yellow, but is not the King in Yellow exactly, is on Netflix called Archive 81. And it is the same idea of obsession, and knowing the unknowable ruins you and alters your perception of reality forever. And it is brilliant. It's a dramatization of a podcast of the same name. But I very much recommend Archive 81 if you are Yellow King curious.
All right, Corey.
You can find me on Instagram or Threads these days, doing a lot of cosplay or just shouting about things that I love or that bother. I'm really shouty. You can find me on both of those places under Zombalicious.
VR.
Yeah, doing theater here in the Atlanta, Georgia. So check out alliancetheater.org. We are doing a Christmas Carol, of course, because it's the Christmas season. And on Instagram at A Kid from Macon. And and can't wait for Avatar in
3D.
In 3D, IMAX, Dolby Cinema, all of it. I might see it every day that weekend.
All right, Stephen, Nate, Corey, and Daviar, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. You guys are great.
All right, well, that's it for our discussion on monsters. What did you think about the episode? What did you think about how we handled the topic? What other topics like this would you like for us to do? We have a lot of episodes planned for various seasons of shows or movies that are coming up, but topics are the things we really want to know what you want to hear from us, because there's a lot of different topics that we could get into with Geeky Media. So let us know. You can do that in a bunch of different ways. One way is to email us at everything@42cast.com. Another way is to go to our website, 42cast.com, and leave us a message on any of the episodes there. You could also go to our Facebook, facebook.com/42cast, or you can go on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Threads at 42cast and talk to us any of those ways. You can also leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts or on your podcast platform of choice. With Apple Podcasts, we know that the more reviews we get, the higher we show up in searches. So if you have an Apple account, and if you haven't left us a review yet, we'd really appreciate if you would do that. You can help out the show and all the shows on the ESO Network by going to the ESO Network Patreon. You can find that at patreon.com/ESO Network. You can review the different perks that you get for different tiers. You can get access to early episodes of some shows. You can get access to exclusive episodes of some shows. And you can get access to a whole exclusive ESO Network podcast. So if you have the funds to contribute, and if you would like to do so, we would greatly appreciate if you would do that. I have 2 other podcasts which are currently on hiatus. One is Time Streams, which is a Doctor Who podcast. The other is Legendary Forces, which is a Star Wars-focused podcast. I will be taking some time off of work in the coming weeks, and I plan to get at least one episode of one of those series out of the archives and get that released, and plan to make that a regular occurrence moving forward so that we can get through the backlog and start recording new episodes. So keep watching this space for more information as we get through that. In Watch News, Beth and I are still watching the Animaniacs reboot, although we're almost done with that. We're watching Shrinking, we're watching Starfleet Academy, we're watching Paradise. Starfleet Academy is getting kind of trying, but we're sticking with it. I do think it's probably the weakest of the new Star Trek shows since Discovery came out. I have some issues with it. I think some of the issues that people are reporting online aren't really valid, but there are definitely some issues with Starfleet Academy, but we'll definitely record an episode on that, and you'll get to hear my full views once Beth and I get to the end of the season. We also just picked up 12 Monkeys, which is a sci-fi series. I think it originally aired on NBC, but then moved to Sci-Fi Channel, something like that. But anyway, Beth and I are watching through that, of course, based on the movie 12 Monkeys from the 90s. I never watched the show before, but Ryan Guthrie, who is our most prolific guest on the 42 cast, recommended it very highly. So I'm going into that, checking out that show, and let you know what I think. So far, we've just watched the first episode, and it has given kind of an intriguing premise, although I already hate some of what they're doing with time travel in it. I think it has some real inconsistencies, but very few shows do time travel in a way that's logically consistent, so, whatever. In con news, just planning on going to Chicago TARDIS this year, like I've reported before, but if that changes, if we're able to go to another con, it would probably only be Fan Expo Chicago if we go to anything else, although there is, again, supposed to be a Galaxy Con in Milwaukee this year. The one last year was canceled before it got off the ground, so I don't know if this one will actually make it. But if it does, that might be one that we go to. Again, keep watching this space, and I'll update you. But that's a wrap for this week. Join us back next week when Bryn Chandler joins us. Bryn is a writer that worked on shows like She-Ra, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman the Animated Series, Gargoyles, as well as so many more. And she gave her time to talk to us about her time writing animation, about her interests. I was very generous and really appreciated talking with her. So come back next week to check that out. And until then, this is Nathan signing off. You have been listening to the 42 Cast, copyright 2026. Got a question for the ultimate answer? Contact us at everything@42cast.com. Theme music is Sharper Swords by Brandon Ellis. Check out more of his work at www.cityfires.com. The 42 Cast is a proud member of the ESO Network. And now for some outtakes.
From it, based off of it.
Oh,
For the many
Steven,
seconds
have
I'm
you
on
heard
screen,
anything
it was
about
fun.
the movie that you're in, the film that was with
I
Billy
have
Ward?
not. No, thank you. I have not, and I'm doing right now. I'm doing It's a Wonderful Life, like a radio production, and there's a couple other people
nice.
in that show who are also in that movie, and we're all talking amongst ourselves, going, "Have you heard anything?" Nobody's heard a thing, and it's so weird because it's so quiet Nobody's saying anything. There's very little information, and I'm like, this is a rom-com. Why are we being so secretive of it? This is not. It's not a Star Wars movie.
And you
it's
filmed
not
that like a year ago, right?
exactly. And we thought at the time it was going to be out like, the following spring, and we've heard nothing. It's been crickets.
Yeah, because I mean, like you were like Billy Lord. I was Billy Lord's father in this movie, and I'm like, oh my god, like that's like
this is right. This is my claim to
now. Like
my claim to, I'm Princess Leia's hot husband. I'm like,
I wonder if there's is it like they're having distribution issues or something. Maybe I don't know.
I don't know. I really
so weird. There's so many things.
I've looked around. I have not found any information. Nothing.
Any movie or any show that gets actually produced and made is kind of its own little miracle. The more I learn about, I don't do filmmaking. I am not an artist. I make my little costumes. And
I was about to say, you say that,
that's
but your
artists.
cosplays are artistic works.
But I'm just saying those, the more I know about filmmaking through a lot of friends that do like filmmaking stuff, the more I realize that like every single project is just a little bit of a miracle that it gets done at all.
Always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I hope
it's an interesting.
It wasn't a Warner Brothers picture, was it?
I don't. I don't even know who the studio is. I'll be honest.
It's a tax break. It's a tax break.
That thought had crossed my mind, but I can't imagine.
If it was good, it's probably a tax write-off.
Oh wow! So you don't even remember which studio it was that was made?
No, I don't. I know the cast was amazing. Chloe Moritz was in it. Anthony Ramos was in it.
Oh wow! Yeah, that is a pretty stacked cast there.
Billy Lord, my daughter, was in it.
Well, come on, tell the thing she said to you. You know you want to.
Okay. So the story. So I get cast, and it's just like to be in a wedding, and then like they send me a message, and then they're like, okay, we want you to play the role of Tilda's dad. So I don't know who Tilda is. So I go on IMDb and I'm trying to look at, and that's where I see the cast, but there's no characters or anything, so I still don't know. So I go through makeup, and the makeup artist is like, so do you know who Tilda is? And I'm like, I can't find any information out at all. She's like, are you a Star Wars fan? So now I know Billy Lord is my daughter. So then they call us on set, and they're filming the vows, and they seat us like in the first row, and they do the scenes with the vows, and then the director's like, okay, we need to get some shots of her coming down the aisle. Who's dad? So I raise my hand, and Billy looks at me, and she's like, he's perfect. Wait, you're too hot to be my dad.
Oh
wow!
Right? Like, cancel Christmas.
That's
it.
Oh my god! Congrats, man! That's awesome.
That was. I think I did say cancel Christmas, and Chloe Moritz laughed at that. But
awesome.
you can chew on that forever.
I'm now Princess Leia's hot husband. Is how I'm working
the
it.
closest I ever came was I met Nichelle Nichols. She came to Milwaukee in 2019, and when the 1 year we actually had a con in Milwaukee. Because they haven't had one since it never came back because of COVID and all these years since. But Nichelle Nichols was there, and I paid for like the selfie with her, and I get behind. She's like, "Come over here, handsome," and I'm like, "I've just been telling everybody, Nichelle Nichols called me handsome." She calls all the guys handsome. Still,
no, it was just you. It was just you. Nick. Just you.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.